with President Obama has been our conscience about meeting in person. And while we certainly thought we were going to have opportunity for all of us to be together one last time, it's just is not possible. So some are out of the city and some are out of the state, and others, for the correct reasons of COVID, are not with us. If you'll remember, February 14th of this year, the governor established the study group on gaming policy with her executive order 719. We have just this morning at about 10:15 delivered this report, which is about a 10-pound, 840-page document, but the essence of that document is about 35 pages of what we call observations, conclusions, and best practices. And those are all included in the document. As we speak, I think that document is being downloaded or uploaded, whatever you load, on the website, and it's available for media as well as others along the way. I wanted to speak just a moment about how this has been accomplished, and frankly, it started with a very good executive order. We didn't think much of, I didn't think much of an executive order, but as you looked at what the charge was, she asked some very pertinent questions that she, on behalf of the legislature and the state of Alabama, wanted answers to. So that in and of itself was a really good guide for us to begin our activities. The next key to what I'm going to call a successful completion were the 12 people that she actually appointed. And as I indicated, we have 6 of them here, but let me tell you who those 12 are in just a moment about what they are, who they are. Ray Almodovar, he's from Huntsville. He's a company owner, and he's a professional engineer, brought a lot to the equation on the technical side of the. Dr. Deborah Barnhart, she's also from Tuscaloosa, but she recently retired in December of last year as the CEO of the Space and Rocket Center in Birmingham. Walter Bell, who's former commissioner of insurance here, he's in Mobile. And then I've already mentioned Dr. Regina Benjamin, the Surgeon General, and still involved with this COVID and a very important advisor to that whole process. Young Boozer, who is no stranger to politics, former treasurer, and now works in the banking organization. He was part of this and chaired a committee that looked at the various venues and what the revenue streams are going to be from those. Sam Cochran. Sam is the sheriff of Mobile County. Obviously, he deals with the illegality of gambling in Mobile, and certainly with his cohorts around the state and the frustrations. Liz Hurley, who's on my immediate right. Liz is miss everything. I mean, when I hear about what's going on with Liz Huntley, Liz Huntley, she's a board of trustee at Auburn, and she's Lightfoot, Franklin White in Birmingham. She's been a very significant player. She chaired also one of the committees that we had. Carl Jameson, he's Mr. Everything because he's a BCA and he's a great accountant over in Tuscaloosa. He's been a really valuable addition. Justice Jim Main, former Supreme Court Justice, he chaired one of the committees. Phil Rawls, who has done a great job of helping Brooks edit and write some of the report that you will see here, spent 35 years or so with AP. And then Mike Watson. Mike is in Birmingham, and he is a former, I don't know that you're ever a former bishop, but he was bishop in the Methodist Church and was very interested, as was Deborah, on the social cost side of the equation. And so from that standpoint, those 12 working together have been invaluable. And then you can't do that in a vacuum. The staff that the governor made available to us early on, it was Baker Allen, who was in the policy group. But Baker in May of this year went on to the League of Municipalities, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, the chairman is going to have a big workload to do. But Brooks McClendon kind of rode in at the governor's request, and he's in the Legislative Affairs Office, and Brooks for the last 6 months has done yeoman work along with Will Parker and Erica McKay. Will is a legal advisor, and a lot of the work that you see there Brooks is responsible for as well. And I have to mention former Justice Bernard Harwood. He was hired by the state to be a part of our group to advise us on the legalities, particularly on the federal side of the equation. I've already talked about the process when you're looking at this big elephant. How are you going to tackle it? And we did as normally you do. You take it one bite at a time. And because we were not in a position, because of COVID, to have individual meetings, we actually had one public meeting. The rest of the time, it's all been by Zoom. We've not been together. This is the most that we've really been together since March. But we divided into 4 subgroups: the possible gaming venues and the applicable federal laws. And I said Jim Main headed that. The benefits of legalized gambling, Young Boozer chaired that particular group. The cost of legalized, the economic, the social, all of those issues, Deborah Bernhardt chaired. And then the regulatory structures, governance, and best practices, Liz Huntley was the one that did that. I've already mentioned the fact that we only had one public meeting. We had 5 or 6 Zoom meetings as public meetings, and we would have as many as 120 interested parties involved in those Zoom meetings. Once we had the Zoom meetings for 2 or 3 months, then we've had 10 or 12 Zoom meetings with the committee as we wrestled with and as we debated and as we discussed coming to these observations, conclusions, and best practices. And I don't know how many pieces of paper we've used for drafts, but we had probably 5 or 6 drafts, and what you see behind us is in fact the last one. That report covers about 35 pages of answering what I held up earlier. Spends about 35 pages answering the executive order questions, providing just what the factual situation really is. The balance of the 800 pages or so are the reports, the opinions, the letters, the comments, the charts, the graphs that we received from the various consultants that we've asked to do this. We did, in fact, have a budget to hire organizations like PARCA, Dr. Kavan Daravi, and many others. We start off in the report discussing what the current state of gambling / bingo is in the state of Alabama. We go through a litany of things, and really the conclusions you get there, I mean, gambling, bingo, is all over the board in the state because we don't have a central authority, because there's really no opportunity to enforce what the regulations are. So once we got past that, then we get into some of the conclusions and the best practices. Alabama is really coming late to this gambling party, if you will, and there are 46 other states that have gambling in their borders. And so there's been a lot of successes, and there have been some mistakes along the way. And we're in a position to gather those best practices and incorporate those in some of the thoughts that are in this particular report. I know you're waiting on hearing some of the conclusions that we've come to, and I would ask Young Boozer, who was chair of that committee, if I make a mistake or give a wrong number, I'm sure he'll be quick to correct that. But at the end of the day, we looked at various gaming types. We call them venues, and they're myriad of them. I mean, you just think of 3 or 4, but they're 12 or 15. but we picked really four basic venues. Obviously, we looked at the lottery, we looked at the traditional casino-style gambling, and then we also looked at sports betting. From the lottery standpoint, that's generally, if not exclusively, state-run. In that particular deal, we looked at it from surrounding states. We looked at it from averages of other states. The Department of Revenue gave us some numbers, as well as the PARCA gave us some numbers there, and we came to our own conclusion to say that we think lottery will generate, in today's dollar, starting out in the $200 million range, will go fairly rapidly to a $300 million range, and then over time will grow at what the state grows at. You know that lotteries are surrounding us. I'm not sure how many from other states would come to Alabama to do that. That's why it has to be a competitive adventure. You don't want to be a payout of 45%, and Mississippi's doing 65%, so you got to be competitive. So 200 to 300 million from the lottery. The casino style, and that would be everything from slots, well, what the federal government calls Class 3, slots to table games to card rooms to dice, etc. That's a $300 to $400 million revenue stream, again starting out at the 300, growing pretty rapidly to the 400, and then leveling off and growing at the state. What was really interesting in finding around the country, 75% of that 300,000 to 400,000 is from the slot machines. Only 25%, actually it's 24%, will come from the balance of that. And then sports betting. It's only been around for a while. There's only a handful of states that actually have it. A big mistake was made a number of years ago when they only had sports betting at a location, at a casino, at a sports shop. And those have died on the vine because they weren't flexible enough, because it was in their constitution to be able to get the electronic side of the equation. And so the revenue stream today is not that significant, estimated, in the $10 million range, growing maybe to $15 million. Another thing we saw a number of times is there's some supposition or statement that Alabama, on a per capita basis, has the highest per capita illegal sports betting in the United States. So again, our conclusions are 500 to 700 million to start. There's also job creation. One of the reports say up to 19,000. That might be a bit aggressive, but something in the 3,000 to 4,000 range at a good paying job. On average, you're going to have about 750 employees in a specific casino, and so there's job creation that would go along with that. I know you're thinking about, well, you're going to create $600 to $700 million. Those are dollars that only come from the gambling operation itself. That does not include any licensing that might be available from whomever is issuing the license and things of that nature, and that's kind of really all over the board. And then you talk about, well, what are the uses of those funds? Well, the uses of those funds are certainly significant, but we did not make any specific conclusion about how they ought to be used. But what we did do is we went to every state in the United States, and we have a chart in the book that'll show you what every state uses those funds for. And I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you that well over half of them focus on educational opportunities. That's not an endorsement or even a recommendation, but that's just a fact. If you look at the charts, you'll see that's there. Let me spend just a moment to talk about the numbers of people that we have determined that on average will be playing. We have a population of just under 5 million, 4.9, 18 years of age and over. There's 3.8. 60% of that, which is the average number of citizens likely to play, would get you to about 2.3 million. And we're trying to get to where the problem gamblers might be, because obviously from a social cost standpoint, that's a significant number. Well, it's less than 3% on average, and that would mean that we'd have 66,000 individuals that would have problem gambling, and then compulsive is less than 1%, it's 0.6%, and that's about 14,000 people. So you'd have 2.3 million playing, and then you would have 66 and 14,000 on that side of the equation. We also looked at our surrounding states and other states that we thought had good practices as to what some of the best practices were, and those are included in there. Understanding that this is a brand new function for the state of Alabama, so you got some ramping up that you got to be able to do. The governance must be adaptive. You don't want to get stuck in a constitution, what you can do, payouts, and where it can be, and things like that. You got to be flexible to be able to move to electronic issues when you have to do that. It's got to be protective of the consumer. It's got to be responsive to the technology, and as I mentioned earlier, it's got to be competitive along the way. And you got to have a single authority that can regulate, administer, and then enforce. And that's a biggie, enforce what the rules of the road are. And then it goes without saying, but we said it over and over and over again, you got to trust that system. So the highest of ethical standards need to be incorporated in the documents. And I might just add right here, I'm sure you know that the legislature just cannot pass a law, a statute, and to have gaming in our state. It has to be voted upon by the people. And so the job of the legislature and the administration is to craft a document that, if they so choose, put it in front of the people to be able to vote on that. While this isn't necessarily as significant to the average person, the best practice is to say that it not be a state agency, that it be a corporation that would be run by a board of trustees. And that board of trustees would be appointed by the governor and approved by the Senate. That's what a number of the more successful states have done, and we've got some great examples. The Port Authority is a perfect example there. But also, there's the shareholder input has to be there, because particularly on the lottery side, you want the retailers to be able to have a group that would be advisory as well. I'm not going to say a lot about the compact. We do talk about the compact, and it's very legal. And I am not an attorney, but at the end of the day, for the revenues to be shared under the federal government regulations by tribal casinos on tribal lands, there's got to be a compact. But what has to be in the compact, it has to be negotiated in good faith, and it has to have an economically viable concession to the tribe that would be negotiating the compact with the state. And all of that is in the eye of the federal government. That compact has to be signed by the Secretary of the Interior, negotiated by the state and the tribe, but signed off by the Secretary of the Interior. At the end of the day, we've got 5 options. One option would be to do nothing, just maintain the status quo. Well, we know that that's really something that we in Alabama, we gamble. I mean, we go to the other states, and we're taking all of our revenue over there. And frankly, we have some of the social costs because we've got gamblers, but we get no revenue from that at all. Secondly, we can prohibit gambling, but incorporate this regulatory authority that would have the regulatory, administrative, and enforcement authority. That would be option number 2. Number 3 option would be allow lottery but nothing else out there. Prohibit the gambling all except lottery, and that would be in the Class 3 category under federal designation. You can allow limited gambling. And when I say limited gambling, what we're talking about is limited in the type the venue, and even limited in the geography. One of the things the governor said that she didn't want to be known as the Las Vegas governor. She wants to give the people the opportunity, but she didn't want a slot machine on every corner in the state, and nor do we, and I think that's reflected in there. And then the other option would be your full gambling, Class 3 in all its facets, but again, all of that under a single regulatory authority that would have the responsibilities as we've outlined. So at the end of the day, the summary conclusions are this. One, gambling will work in the state of Alabama, and we feel that the advantages outweigh the disadvantages in that endeavor. There is $600 to $700 million that start and stabilize and grow. There are new jobs that would be created, jobs that will be about twice what the average personal income is on a per capita basis. We know there will be costs. There'll be social costs. There'll be economic costs. There'll be criminal costs. There'll be a number of costs, but again, manageable, because what we see in other states is there are revenues, albeit a small amount. In Alabama, it might on average be in the $2 to $4 million range to deal with mental health and some of the addictions and things like that. And then the other summary is that single regulatory identity that has the authority to regulate, administer, enforce with transparency, with flexibility, with competitiveness, and integrity. So that's what's included in 840 pages or 35 pages. And you see some subject matter experts behind me, and I know that you've got questions galore. We probably don't have all the answers, but our job, in our view, and the governor thanked us this morning, and we all certainly thanked her, because this has been a great honor to at least give to the legislature, to the administration, and especially the people of Alabama what the facts are. Y'all remember Joe Friday and Dragnet? All he wanted was the facts, ma'am, just the facts. And that's what we've given. With one exception, we have come to a few conclusions that we think would be for the betterment of moving this process forward in the state. So with that, more than happy to take any questions or any. Yes, sir. That's a question for the administration on the special session, but I'll say this. You can't get to gaming past bingo until and unless the people of the state of Alabama vote upon it. And so at that time is when you would be in a position to go to the federal government, to go to IGRA, to work through the compacts, because tribal does not have the ability to have any gambling more than what's already legal in the state of Alabama. So the timing is a legislative issue, along with the administration, to work through what's going to be put before the citizens to vote upon. I'm not sure of the timing, but you cannot even get to the compact until it's legal in the state of Alabama. But I'm going to leave the answer to that question to the administration, because that was not part of our purview to come up with the timing on that. We just know that it's got to be the compact to share the revenue, but that can only happen after it's legal.
The 600 to 700 million figure you're quoting, is that a lottery, all gambling, sports book, is everything?
You want to pick up that, John?
Yeah. Yeah, there are three components to that. The first component is lottery, which is the estimate is 200 million to 300 million. The Second part of that is casino, which would be 300 to 400 million. And sports betting at this time is in its early stages, and we estimate $10 million or so. So that's the breakdown. And what we did was we just said, let's take the average of those two numbers and put those together, and that's where we come up with the number for the total.
You might talk about the payout ratios that we saw across the board of 60% and 25% and 15%.
Yeah, so if we look at the lottery has got three major components. First of all, there are 45 other states that have lotteries, so we are late to the game, and it is a well-developed business model. And there are three things that you need to focus on as you're operating a lottery. The first is, what are your costs? And costs range from 8 to 10%. But let's just use 10% for right now. Then you are going to have a payout to those who play your games. And that payout is typically 55% to 65%. And then the remainder, which is, let's call it 65%, so now I'm at 75% for costs and payout. That means about 25% would be available to beneficiaries in the state of Alabama. The key to running a successful lottery is to be competitive. There are two states that I can recall right now, Louisiana and Oklahoma, who hardwired their payouts to the beneficiaries at 35%, which means that 10% came out of what the players would win. Players know their business, and they're not going to play somebody who is a small payout or a smaller payout. So you have to be competitive on the payout side.
And just on the casino side, are you anticipating that money coming from existing gambling in the state, or are you, does that figure assume there would be other casinos brought into the state?
It assumes there would be a larger field in the casino business.
How much bigger are we talking?
We estimated based on 5 casinos operating within the state of Alabama. And there's some variation to that. The other thing, let me point out, is that the state operates the lottery. The state pays it's an organization. It pays the cost for operation, and it pulls in the money that goes to ultimately to the beneficiaries. So we are operating a business. On the casino side, it is a revenue tax. So we are not in the casino business. We will be in the business of identifying people to operate casinos. And on sports betting, it is they call it a fee. It is really a tax, and it's typically 10% around the country. So whatever the amount of the gaming is, we would get a 10% piece of that.
Yes, ma'am.
One of the arguments that's been made by lottery opponents is that if we had the lottery only in the sports agreement to have full casino fees. Did you answer that question, or is that what's the truth on that?
Yeah. I think the truth is still in the courts to be able to decide that. Without getting the legalities, and I don't know that he's probably escaped because here he is. There's some language in the federal regulation that says such gaming. And the question that the courts are beginning to answer is, what is such gaming? Does such gaming mean all of Class 3, or such gaming means just what's permitted? And so that's still a question to be answered by the body of judicial opinions that are coming out. And that's where Justice Harwood and Justice Mayne were really focusing on. It'd be really easy to know unequivocally what the answer to that question is, but today that answer could be one, it could be the other.
Mayor, when you look at other states that have approved gaming, how accurate are their?
Let's talk about Mississippi, because they have had casino gaming for a long time. They've just in the last year gotten the lottery side of the equation. They made some estimates, and Young and his group looked at those very closely. So why don't you talk about that?
So Mississippi approved a lottery probably about 2.5 years ago, and they went live in November of last year, so they've been operating for a full year at this point in time. They did some estimates based on a per capita basis, and they estimated that they would take in approximately $120 million for the for the fiscal year, for the 12-month period. Right now, they are on target for doing that. And it's really kind of remarkable is that they have been hitting it about $9 million, $10 million a month, all during that time period from the very beginning. Now, I will say this, is that we looked at what they estimated, and we have been following that on a monthly basis, and we based our estimates pretty heavily upon that formula. So they have done what they said they would do, and I think when we talk about $200 to $300 million, we're in the ballpark for doing what we can do.
A lot of the lottery revenue also depends upon how aggressive you are in the regional contests that are out there, being able to tie into some of the bigger pots, and certainly that would be a conclusion that we would say you ought to be doing.
In the past, experts have told us that gambling is a revenue that, as I think you mentioned this, it brings in a lot of money up front, but it's not a revenue that necessarily grows over time. Your estimates would be like roughly maybe 10% of the education budget, maybe about a third of the general fund. Is this a revenue stream that legislators could rely on to address any budget issues in the future, or is this something that we might have for a couple of years and we'll be back to the drawing?
Yeah. I'm not going to answer it because I don't know the answer, and that's the legislative response that would be needed there. But as we look again at this chart that is in there, you'll see that some of the more successful situations only have 3 or 4 uses of those monies. If you try to nickel and dime it at 100 use and fill holes in general funds, that's generally not successful. And so again, I said more than half have a big component of the revenue for education.
Also, what's your recommendation on the legality of electronic bingo in the state's law?
I don't have a legal opinion. I'm not an attorney, and we didn't look at that. Yes, sir. Yeah, actually the number was 5 to 7. Yeah, 5 to 7, because you already got 3. I mean, you got a number of already existing bingo opportunities, and whether they call them casinos or not, I don't know. But let's just say 5 to 7.
We already have, theoretically, Birmingham Race Course, Victoryland, Greene County. Are you looking at possibly Fort Payne or Huntsville, casino in North Alabama?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we're not looking at any location in the state, and what best practices are and what our conclusions are is not to make that really an issue with this legislation that we vote upon, except to the extent that you create a single regulatory authority that would very strategically look at the state and make sure that these entertainment venues were situated such that all of the state could benefit from that. Also know that if you are closer to the casino, the transfer of revenue from the locals to the state is going to be pretty significant, and that's something that we've pointed out in our report, that there's not a lot of new dollars that are going to be out there, and so rather than putting a full tank of gas or buying 5 meals a week or whatever it is, you're going to defer that over to gaming, and so that takes money out of the local side of the equation. But those are issues that can be well adjusted. So, thanks, guys. Hello, Mike. And to you, sir.